Despite being at the end of 2025, subject scaling is still one of the most confusing aspects of Australia's education system. It's definitely up there with Australia's complex school funding approach or overly crowded learning curriculum that fails to teach lifelong skills to students. But I think how subjects scale is likely the most important concept running through students' minds as we speak. After all, the subjects you select will end up determining your ATAR and ultimately your chances of living a successful life.
Are you serious?
That was a joke, but for a lot of students, it can honestly feel like that sometimes. And so to clear the confusion about subject scaling, I want to use this video to clearly explain how it works in the HSC, the VCE, and the QCE. I'll specifically touch on what and why certain subjects scale well, and then how you should think about choosing subjects for each curriculum. And at the very end, I'll give some key pointers I think all students should consider regardless of what curriculum you study. So make sure you watch to the end of the video to find out what those are. So the HSC actually has some of the clearest scaling data over the last 2 decades, and it's no surprise as to what subjects actually scale really, really well. It's STEM subjects, so think your Mathematics Extension 2, your Physics, or your Chemistry. Just to put it into perspective, in 2024, Mathematics Extension 2 managed to have an averaged scale score of 92.3. Or even Physics scaled to about 81.7 and Chemistry sat around 79. Now you probably knew that these subjects scale really well even before having clicked onto this video, but what you might struggle to understand is why they scale so well. Now most students and parents think that high scaling subjects are reflective of their difficulty, but it has nothing to do with scaling. The real reason these subjects scale really well is because of the type of students that end up taking these subjects. And so the level of difficulty isn't relevant when talking about scaling. It's more so how competitive the cohort is in that given subject. And so when UAC looks at the cohort over the years that have taken Mathematics Extension 2 and Physics, they see a clear pattern in the type of student that takes these subjects, which are usually all high performers. And so for that reason, they adjust the difficulty and more importantly, the level of scaling that is applied to these type of subjects. Now I quickly want to touch on HSC English because it is a compulsory subject. Now just for some context, English Advanced in 2024 had an average scaled score of 80.5, so that's about a band 5, and then English Standard had an average scaled score of about 70.2. Now, whilst that might be a 10-point difference between the two levels of HSC English, it isn't actually that much different in terms of difficulty. So if you're on the fence about which level of English you should be doing, I would urge you to choose Advanced English over Standard English because it's one of the few subjects where the scaling difference is big enough to matter, but the skill gap and the level of difficulty isn't as brutal as, say, going from general or advanced maths to doing Mathematics Extension 2. Now, when it comes to what were the best scaling subjects in 2024, again, it's no surprise. You've got specialist mathematics, mathematical methods, and physics and chemistry. Now, I came across an interesting term called the Suicide 6 subjects. And at first, I was a little confused as to what this was, but then I realized that this is a unique and challenging combination of subjects QCE students can take, which includes specialist maths, methods, physics, chemistry, biology, and English. Now, this is one of the most challenging and competitive subject combinations you can take in the QCE, because if you're not naturally strong at these subjects, then it's probably going to be a very arduous journey, a very difficult one, and you're not going to be able to sustainably hold yourself throughout the year. And this is a good part in the video to just give you a reminder that the ATAR system is designed to reward performance, not just subject choice. Yes, scaling does have a role and an effect on your ATAR, but it isn't the be all and end all. You're better off choosing subjects that you're interested in, but also have unique strengths in. Now, just quickly, a QCE subject that a lot of students actually overlook is literature. And if you're a student that enjoys reading, writing, and doing deep analysis on text, then it's better to actually take on literature than to do, general English, for example, because literature actually scales much better than your general English subject. And so when thinking about your ATAR in big picture terms, it might be a smarter play to do literature than to do an easier English subject because the scaling potential is much better. Now, out of all the curriculums we've talked about, I think VCE is the most surprising when it comes to subject scaling, because in 2024, a raw study score of 35 in Latin scaled to 50. That's a 15-point jump. And then you have Hebrew, which managed to scale to 47, and even Chinese second language, which scaled to a 46. So apparently in the VCE system, your LOTE or languages other than English subjects absolutely dominate VCE scaling, which is very different to what we've seen in QCE and HSE, where majority is STEM related subjects. Now, if you're a VCE student sitting there thinking that you could possibly take these subjects because they aren't STEM subjects, so they should be easier, you probably shouldn't, because if you're not a native speaker, it's going to be a tough journey. As I've said multiple times in this very video, it's always the cohort you have to evaluate, because when you look at language subjects, regardless of whether it's VCE, QCE, or HSC curriculum, majority of the time, the students that make up these subjects are actually native speakers, or they are students who've been learning the subject and speaking it for multiple years. So if you're going into these subjects thinking that they scale really well and aren't as difficult as, per se, your STEM subjects, it's the wrong thinking to have, because the scaling is not what's going to pull you through the subject. I mean, you still have to do relatively well in order to actually receive the benefits of scaling. Now, let's just quickly look at some of the more common VCE subjects students take that scale relatively well. So you've got specialist maths that scaled from a raw 35 to 48. You've got your methods that scaled from 35 to 41, and then you have chemistry that scaled 39 and physics that scaled 38. Now, something to keep in mind is that only your top 4 subjects in the VCE system count fully towards your final ATAR score, and up to 2 more subjects can contribute to about 10%. So technically that means your weakest subject doesn't actually matter that much if your top 4 are the ones that you're most interested in and strongest at. If you have access to your past school reports or your current school report,
maths 25%, English 15%.
I would use those as a way to help determine what subjects you're actually good at. There were some things I wanted to leave towards the end that are applicable to any student, regardless of what curriculum you're studying in. So the first one is to always prioritize your strengths rather than your interests. It isn't just about what subjects you're interested in, but really looking deep into what type of subjects you have unique advantages in, or what I like to call an unfair advantage. And so earlier I mentioned going through your school report and looking at the subjects where you tend to perform really well compared to some of the other subjects. And those are the subjects you should prioritize when you're selecting those final year 12 subjects to take on. Now, the second universally applicable tip I want to give is making sure that you check for prerequisites for university. Now, some of you might know this and others might be completely unaware of it, but some university courses require prerequisite subjects to have been taken. Usually it's an encouragement rather than a mandatory thing to do. So they encourage you to take these subjects. They don't mandate it and tell you that if you have not done this, you can't take on the university course. And so you shouldn't skip these subjects just because they don't scale well compared to some of the other subjects you can choose from, or you feel like you're not good at it. Because an easy way to bridge that gap is definitely tutoring, and you're looking at some of the best tutors in the country right here, KISS Tutoring. Check the link in the description and find a high-performing tutor today. The third universally applicable thing I want to mention is to be very strategic about managing your subject workload. You want to make sure that you can try and balance your subjects, and a great way to do that is to have 1 or 2 maximum lighter, easier subjects that maybe not pique your interest as much, but because their nature is to be easier, you're able to score very well in them. Because when you look at my final universally applicable point, it is that your ATAR isn't the be-all and end-all of your life. That after you finish high school, there are way more opportunities and things that you can achieve and do in life that don't rely on your ATAR. And your ATAR honestly becomes insignificant the moment you step into university. Yes, it is a stepping stone into the world of universities, but once you're in, people don't admire you for the type of ATAR that you achieved. Rather, it comes down to your interests, who you are as a person, and what outcomes and output you can give to the world. So now you know a little bit more about subject scaling and why not it matters as much as you think. But if you look at the majority of students scoring 95 plus ATARs, they're actually students who just pick subjects because They were already good at it and they prioritized interest and strengths rather than listening to what other people had to say. So if you're still stuck on what subjects you should be choosing, or maybe you're stuck on what subjects you should be dropping, then it's best to talk to someone that's done it before. So that could be maybe your teacher, that could be a current year 12 student taking one of the subjects, or even talking to a tutor, like a KISS tutor, for example. Again, link in the description. It's just sitting there waiting for you to click it. But other than that, I really hope you enjoyed this breakdown of what scaling is and how it looks like in each of the curriculums, or the most popular curriculums, year 12 curriculums in Australia. And I hope to catch you in the next video.